Good morning, everyone, and aloha. Um, my name is Glenn Tevis. I'm a county extension agent on Molokai. I've been involved in seed saving now for about 8 years intensively, trying to develop new varieties and stuff like that. So seed saving is not rocket science. It's something that has been done since ancient times. This is one of the Native American tribes along the California coast, the Poma. They're in Northern California. Okay. So I've been working with a lot of different organizations in trying to develop a community-based seed industry in Hawaii. So hopefully we can get some of this started. I try to start with some sayings. This is from Robert Louis Stevenson, who used to spend a lot of time in Hawaii. Everybody focuses on harvesting, but you got to focus on planting. I think in everything we do. This one I just picked up recently and really interesting because I think living in Hawaii, people don't realize how food insecure we are. I mean, it's just, we have 7 days worth of food. It can get real bad, real fast. There's a perception on this island that, oh, don't worry, if there's a disaster, we're gonna do all right. You know, we still can fish and hunt. But the question is, how do you get to the fish if you don't have gas? We started in about 2010. We did an assessment of needs in Hawaii, and we saw that a lot of people were interested in growing seeds. And in 2010, we had a 2-day workshop on the Big Island. We brought in all these experts, and it was really interesting because there was a lot of interest. Then we had 2-day workshops on all the islands. Some of you folks might have been involved. And out of this effort became the formation of the Hawaii Seed Growers Network, of which I'm part of. We have a website and we started to sell seeds, and we're still trying to develop more varieties for Hawaii. It's interesting because we have so many different climates in Hawaii that we have 140 different soils. So we have most of the climatic zones. So you multiply those two numbers and that's how many microclimates you have in Hawaii. And so some varieties will grow good in certain areas and some won't. So you have to have farmers in different parts of the state developing varieties for their area and then have access to some of that seed. And this is our Molokai Seed Basics workshop in 2013. We had a pretty good group. So we had a really good feedback. 2 days of seed workshop is like hardly anything for the amount of stuff you need to learn. And even this session I have is like a crash course. I do it once a year. It's getting to the point where I have enough for like a whole series of classes. So this is some of the stuff I collect now. I got my list up to about 40 different seeds. And now trying to move into developing new varieties for Molokai. So seeds are the spark of the farm. You got good seeds adapted to Molokai, adapted to your community. You got something worth growing. Especially with all the problems we're dealing with climate change and heavy rain in the summertime, creating all kind of problems. So why save seeds? Probably the most important, I think, right here, well, they're all important. Food security, having crops when you need it. I was growing taro for the last 4 years, and my wife kept saying, you gotta keep planting taro, so in case anything happens, it's there in the ground, you know. Sweet potato, the same thing, breadfruit. But taro is probably the one that, you know, you can harvest at any time and you can eat the whole plant. So, and then having seeds that are adapted. If you look at the seeds that come in from the mainland, the two priorities in developing seeds on the mainland and in Europe are earliness, because the snow is going to come, and cold tolerance, because the snow is going to come. Okay, so they're not interested in heat tolerance, disease resistance, and all these kind of problems we deal with. So adapted seed is really important. Availability of seed. The seed production is so concentrated in certain areas of the world. You got a storm and you just wiped out a whole bunch of seed. About 3 years ago, a friend of mine called me up. She goes, you got to buy seeds now because they just had a flood in Southeast Asia. So all the seeds in Burma, Vietnam got wiped out. And so a lot of the oriental vegetables were not available. Long beans and some of the stuff that we eat a lot, bitter melon. Okay. And seed sovereignty, controlling our seed. Because you have a few companies controlling all the seeds, and what they're doing is actually only allowing certain varieties out in order to make money off those varieties. So they're actually stockpiling seed that is probably really good for us, but we can't get access to the seed. Okay, and this is our lifeline, and sometimes it breaks. Last year, the cable broke on the barge in the middle of the Molokai and Molokai Channel, and the barge was just floating around and trying to figure out, okay, how do we hook this barge back up? Okay, and then being able, seed security is food security. You got the seed, you can plant it. If you don't have the seed, you cannot plant it. And a lot of times you go to the store, you buy the seed, and the seed's not good. Okay, so, and they're getting very expensive. Okay, so look at tomato seeds, 50 seeds for $64. Okay, so these are the prices out of the Johnny's Seed catalog this year. So they get really expensive, and I mean, some seeds are like $1 a seed. So somebody can make money growing seed. Okay, so I think one of the most important things is, in order to control diseases, you have to grow healthy plants. You know, it's not about, okay, I gotta spray this plant, and you need to grow plants that, first you need to know how to grow the plant. You need to know your soil, and you need to know season sometime, and that is the way you get around pest and disease problems. Okay, so, and then building organic matter. Right now we have a lot of organic matter out there. It's growing overnight. And you just have to go out there and chop it up and throw it on the ground or make it up in a pile, turn the mulch into compost, and then now you got something to work with. And with good soil, you can overcome this problem. This is a major problem on Molokai root knot nematodes on a lot of the different crops. And some crops are really susceptible. We actually try to find varieties that are tolerant. Probably one of the most important things in growing seeds is you need to understand the crop. And even on taro, you know, people need to understand how to grow taro. I mean, people call me up, wow, my taro's 7 feet tall, it's ready to harvest. I said, no, you have to wait for the thing to drop back down until they're ready to be harvested. Okay. And the other thing is to know your soil. We always push our farmers to do soil samples to get just basic information as a starting point to improve the soil. So soil series, again, we have 140 different soil types. Most of the soils have a Hawaiian name, but some soils were actually classified and identified in other parts of the world. We have some soils like along the South Coast that actually have Puerto Rican names because they were first identified in Puerto Rico. And same type of soil mixed with sand. Okay. Organic matter content, you usually just assume you have none. You have no organic matter, and you constantly build your soil up. A good target would be 5% of the soil. So an acre of soil is 2 million pounds. So 100,000 pounds of organic matter per acre, or about 2.25 pounds per square foot is a target. The problem in Hawaii is the organic matter just burns up so fast with the high temperatures and everything, and so you got to constantly add that material. Knowing the crop history, you kind of know how depleted your soil might be, what was growing on there before. You don't want to grow taro on top of taro, or the same crop on top of each other, because the diseases are just building up. Okay, and developing a conscious crop rotation system. So this is the soil map of Molokai. The main production is right in that middle, in that red soil, which is kind of the right color because the dirt is red. It's high iron. But this soil also occurs above Kalamaula and a lot on the west end. Okay. Then we have this the bottom, the vertisols. That's that dark blue soil, mostly around La'au Point, and then some of them Mahana, where Jamie's farming. But this is some of the richest soils. So this is the one of the soils in Holihua. This is on the eastern part of Holihua, called the Lahaina series, which is same as the soil in parts of Lahaina. And then the western side has another soil called the Molokai series. The Molokai, I've farmed on both of these soils. I like the Molokai soil better. It's a richer soil. But these are some of the generalizations. The older the soil, the more depleted the soil is. Okay, so some of the older islands like Kauai is the oldest island in Oahu and Molokai. Some of these areas, the soil is more depleted, especially if it's in a higher rainfall area. So a lot of the bases are depleted. Knowing this, you can adjust your soil and replace those things that are lacking. So calcium, magnesium, and potassium are usually lacking. Lower rainfall, richer soil. So along the south coast, Kalamaula, Kawela, Kamalo, those areas, the soil is pretty rich because of the low rainfall. And then steep areas, the more runoff, the more loss of soil. So when it rains really hard in Kalai, Molokai receives, Holihoa receives more of your soil. And high wind, which is a real issue in Holihoa, erosion of topsoil. So you need to use windbreaks, cover crops, and the deer is kind of making things worse. Okay, so this is one windbreak we use in Holihoa a lot called sorghum Sudan hybrid grass. It'll get up to about 8 feet tall. You can cut it. You can incorporate it in the soil. You can use it for emergency animal feed. And I bumped into it growing a trial in an alfalfa field. And a farmer said, hey, can you use this for a windbreak? I said, yeah. And then he started planting it. And before you knew it, we had 10 miles. We had 10 miles of this windbreak in Holihoa at one time. So once you get your soil sample back, then you kind of know what kind of calcium source you need to put in. If your soil is low in calcium, the plants are weak. Calcium is a real important component of the cell wall. So if the cell wall is not well developed, the plants are floppy. In taro, if you give them too much nitrogen, you actually create a calcium deficiency, and you have a floppy leaf. And when the cell walls are thin, the plant is more susceptible to diseases because the diseases can penetrate the cell wall. And calcium is really important for human health. So if your soil is low in calcium, that means the food you eat from that soil is probably low in calcium as well. So you can use a lot of different stuff. We even use opihi shells. Biochar is a good calcium source because after you burn off all that stuff, you got all the cell wall. It's basically calcium. Okay. So Holihoa, these are some of the issues, and every area is slightly different. But I think as a whole, Holihoa, this is the main problem. Calcium is most consistently low. Sometimes the pH is low, but usually we have a good pH between 5.5 and maybe closer to 6. Once you know the pH of the soil, then you know what type of calcium amendment you need to use. You pretty much can get away with sand. In certain areas of Holihoa, we're low in calcium and magnesium, so we use dolomite. Dolomite is a little expensive because it's imported. Most of the lime sources in Hawaii, we have ground coral, which is from Hawaii. And you can use sand. The good way of doing it is actually to burn the sand. Say if you use a hibachi for roasting vegetables or meat, you can put sand in the hibachi and then use the sand in the garden. Erosion, wind and water are major issues. Deer are major issues. Major damage on not only the crops but erosion. So this is what happens to the West End on a bad day. I mean, it's just hard to imagine. I would just happen to be flying over when this was happening. And so we have climate change upon us, and I think some of you folks are dealing with it in different ways, like too much rain in the summer, or too much rain, period. Very dry. We have in Holihoa, we have dry periods, we have rainy periods, and it's affecting what insects are dominating. We have like a black moth, the black witch moth is coming out. On a lot of different insects coming out. They usually greet me at my office when I go and open the door. There's some grasshoppers on the handle, the door handle. I think they're trying to get us. And so we get insect flare-ups, and a lot of times the insect becomes a problem when their enemy is being impacted. So what will happen sometimes, like the black moth, the black witch, something is attacking the natural enemies. And some of this stuff we don't really know. You know it's happening, but you don't know what is happening, okay? Then we have new dominant weeds. This summer, the guinea grass was growing like, gangbusters. I couldn't believe, we'd mow it and we'd go back 2 weeks and just like we didn't even mow it. Um, and then this is on Momomi. You know, I mean, just figure out how much mud that is. Um, so this is the female black witch. You have the male and the female. These insects have been around for a long time in South America because the Incas have a name for it and the Aztecs have a name for it. You know, so you can know the thing's been around for a long time. The Inca name for this insect is "Can I borrow your house?" And the Aztecs believe that this is their dead relatives, so nobody wants to kill them. So I wanted to get into some seed basics. This is mamake. I don't know if so many folks have been growing this, but a lot of people are interested in growing this as a tea. So you need to know how to. You have to know seeds in order to grow seeds. You have to understand their needs when you plant them. You need to know what grows in the tray and what goes in the ground. It's amazing how many people don't know. And they put the beans in the trays, and no, the beans go in the ground. The root crops go directly in the ground. The small seeds go in the trays. So annuals and biennials. Okay, so annuals complete their life cycle in 1 year. Okay, biennials require 2 years to complete their life cycle. These are especially seed. This is for seed production. Okay, so we don't do biennials in Hawaii because we don't have that cold snap. But I think it's coming. The cold snap is coming. The last couple of years we had really cold winters. You know, like in Hollywood, it's like with the wind chill, it's probably like 45, 50. You know, and that will allow us to grow new crops. But there's some kale, some carrots and radishes and chard varieties that actually can grow in Hawaii if you have the right conditions and if they reach certain maturity when the cold weather comes. Okay. So open pollinated are the ones that we usually grow. They breed true. That's the seeds that we save. They're the same. There's some variability, which is good because you can select the ones that do better on your farm, on the open pollinated types. All the heirlooms are open pollinated, and this is the most common seed saved. Okay, so the hybrids are basically two unrelated lines crossed together to create an F1. They call them filial one, which is the first children. Okay, these are hybrids. It's a strategy to sell seed. So the seed companies say, oh, you can't save our hybrids. You need to buy it every year. But I save hybrids. If the hybrids are good and I see good characteristics in them, I'll keep it and I'll actually select for open pollinated, develop it into an open pollinated variety. And it's so funny because some companies we say they're hybrids and they're not. So you grow the seeds out and they all come out pretty much the same. You know, usually if they're hybrids, when you plant it, the next generation, it'll be everything from the two parents, from the mother to the father and everything in between. So they come out all different shapes and sizes. So open pollinated versus hybrids. The hybrids are uniform. They're expensive. Open pollinated, not as uniform, but diverse and more resilient. If you keep on selecting the best seeds out of your crop, soon you're going to have varieties that do really well and adapted to your environment. And open pollinated is less expensive, and both seed types are available for conventional and organic systems. Some organic growers also grow hybrid seed. Okay, so getting down to pollinators now. You have crops that pollinate themselves quite easy. It has to do with the flower makeup. So that would be like peas, lettuce, tomato, eggplant, pepper, and others. These are some of the easier seeds to plant because you don't have to worry about them crossing with other stuff. Although you still have some conditions you have to follow because some of them need isolation. Okay, so outcrossers have evolved to cross with another of the same species or closely related species, also called outbreeders. Okay, you have a greater chance of cross-contamination with closely related varieties. Okay, so Brassica oleracea, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, kale, European kale, collards, they all can cross with each other. Okay, cucurbits are pollinated by insects, so these are all cross-pollinated varieties. And if you don't have insects, you won't have fruits on your cucurbits. So bees become a real important part of growing. So there's established planting distances if you're growing seeds and you don't want them to cross with something else. So the closest is the peas, 5 feet apart, and all the way up to the corn and amaranth, where you have to have about 2 miles separation, or you can separate by time and space, so you don't plant them all at one time. So that's what the corn company does. They might plant this week, 2 or 3 weeks later they plant another field, and then they don't cross. And some people say the corn is even farther. Ellen Sugawara on the east end said, "Oh man, I have to go like 5 miles or 10 miles." I said, "Well, flat land maybe yes, but if you got terrain and everything, what is the chance of pollen from Kaunakakai to reach Morris Point? That's pretty strong pollen." Okay, so some crops need, and even crops that don't require pollination can be enhanced sometimes by pollination. You have better quality seed, more seed. Okay. If you're breeding, if you're growing for seed, you need to maintain a certain amount of seed in order to have diversity in your lines. If you take all your seeds from one plant and something's wrong with that plant, maybe it's deficient and you can't really tell until the next generation, and then you plant it and said, "Oh man, these plants are not coming out really nice." So you have a certain amount of plants. Cross-pollinated plants, 200 plants. So if you're gonna grow mustard, you need a whole pile of plants. And you always wanna, if you're gonna save for seed, you always wanna make sure you don't take it from the junk plants, and you only take it from the best plants. And any off types, usually you get rid of the off types. I save them sometimes. I might have a plant that comes out slightly different color from its parents, or even a tomato that might come out slightly different. Okay. Then this is why you keep a whole lot of plants. It's called inbreeding depression. So they just kind of inbreed, and the plants get weak. They're not as vigorous as their parents. So if you have enough of a gene pool, you can prevent this from happening. And again, each plant is an individual. They're all different. They may look the same to you, but they're not. There's slight differences in each plant. Okay. And this is what makes biennial crops flower. It's called vernalization. And that's to do with a temperature drop. And that's why on the mainland, a lot of times they can't plant early. If they plant too early in the season and it gets cold, they flower. They might bolt early and you don't have a crop. But in Hawaii, that's not a problem. So we can plant early. We can plant spring crops in January or sometimes in December and have a nice crop. Well, we can plant anytime for that matter. Okay. But I think this vernalization, we should be able to grow certain types of crops that have not flowered in Hawaii. And it has to do with selecting the right variety, a more tropical variety. Okay. So seed processing is really important. You need to know the crop. You need to know how to save seeds. You need to know how you minimize contamination if you don't want contamination, and also when to harvest. And each crop is very specific in terms of processing the seed. So here I'm just covering real basics. We could spend days talking about this. Okay. Seed separation, we use all kind of different ways of separating the seeds. You're trying to separate the chaff from the seed. Here's some mustards that I just harvested yesterday. This is a variety called Sunga out of Zimbabwe. This is a really hot mustard. The insects don't like them. And I use it for making pickles. Mustard seed for pickles. So I make bread and butter pickles, and I put this in, and I put in Olena in the pickles. So when you do seeds, you need to check how good your seeds are. So you do a germination test, and you can test any amount of seeds you want. If they're just a small batch of seeds, or you don't have a lot of seeds, you might just test 10 seeds. If you have a lot, you have like a pound, you want to test 100, or I think the standard is 300 seeds to see how good the seeds are. Because the worst thing you can do is have junk seed and you plant it out in the field and only half of them come out. All that labor you took to fertilize your field, prepare your field, and put the seeds in the ground, and they're not coming out. Or they're coming out slow, and when they're weak, the insects know they're weak and they're going to start attacking them. We use all kind of ways of separating the seed from the junk. So this is a seed set, a seed screen set. So you have fine screens, and they're separated in 64ths. So you have 1/64, 2/64, 3/64, all the way up to 10/64. This one is 8/64. So this is really fine. So you have the big type screens, and then you got real fine, and you either allowing the seeds to drop down and all the junk stays over here, or the opposite way around. So separating seeds, and you have all kind of methods. I mean, I have a friend of mine in Oregon, and he has a seed farm, wild garden seed, and he'll lay his lettuce seeds on the ground on a tarp, and he put another tarp on it, and then he drives his Datsun pickup truck back and forth and breaks all the seeds up, and then he can just dump the seeds and separate it out. Because part of it is getting the seeds out of their containers. Like this one is called a silique, so it's in there, and you actually got to break it up before the seeds come out. And so if you don't do a good job, you're not going to get the seeds out. And then after you get the seeds out, you usually size it. So you can run it through different sizers. Usually the larger seeds are the better seeds. The smaller ones are not as good. I just separate them out and I use it for different things. So small ones could be used for making pickles. The bigger ones are for growing. And the biggest ones you save for your next crop. So after a while, your seeds are becoming all bigger. You can beat it, you can step on it, you can dance on it. I mean, we look at people making grapes, doing grapes and wine. Okay, so this is how I do germination testing. So I'll get a paper towel, I'll wet it, I'll squeeze it out. I'll put, like this one I did 10 seeds. I mark it, I put it in a Ziploc bag, and then I check it. And I'll know, like by the end of the week, what the germination rate is. Okay. Then you have germination standards. If you're selling seeds, you need to hit these standards. And sometimes we don't. And if you don't, there's a lot of different things you can do. You can rescreen the seeds. You can take the bigger ones. I have a back door of my office where I can actually open the door and I can set the amount of wind that comes out of the back door. And I can screen like my lettuce seeds. I'll pour it, and all the light seeds will blow away, and all the heavy seeds will drop into the bucket. And I can keep doing that until I get the germination standards up.